Shalom. I'm going to be talking about the calendar today. I'm excited to talk about the calendar. It's one of my favorite topics that I've studied since I've been reading and studying the Bible. It's just been a massive blessing to seek the Creator in His feast days and have a schedule that's not in alignment with the world, but in alignment with the way that He created everything. The calendar has been made out to be a really difficult thing by a lot of bigger YouTube channels or people that study the Bible, and it's almost like a phrase that goes around that says like, oh, the calendar is just so hard to study. And I feel like that's just been repeated so many times that it's almost like everybody, the first thing you hear when you talk to somebody about the calendar is say, oh, the calendar is so hard to study. And I've even heard like people take that and say that it doesn't really matter, you just figure it out, or that's just hard to study, so it's just too hard. I'm here to tell you that's not the case. A lot of people will say, with that line of thinking, they say, well, when Messiah returns, He'll set us straight, And one of my friends has a really good saying that I'm going to steal. And he said, what if Messiah did come? And what if Messiah did set it straight? What if Messiah did come and He did give us an example of how and when to keep the feasts? So He definitely did. And the crazy thing to me is that no one has that approach for any other topic. You never hear somebody saying, like, if you're saying, oh yeah, it's important not to eat certain foods like that are found in Leviticus 11, people aren't like, yeah, well, it's a difficult one to study. And it's like, no, it's just really, it's right there. It's in the Bible, it's throughout the whole thing. And so why do people take an approach one way, and say like, oh, the calendar, it's something, it's very hard to study. But then they're not like, it's very hard to study what days He really wants us to observe. It's like, no, it just says it. The same with the eating clean, the same with the calendar. It's all just right in His word in black and white. It's very, very easy. So there's really, if you look at Genesis 1, it says that He created on day 4, He created the sun and the moon and the stars, and He set them within the firmament, which in the Hebrew word is Shemayim, which is heavens, plural. We're going to have a whole video on that. So He created the sun and the moon and the stars for it says they were created for days, for weeks, for everything. He created that to be His calendar, to be for His appointed times. And so if He created the sun, the moon, and the stars, there's only really 3 possibilities of what you could, produce a year or calendar out of. Really not a lot of people, I've never heard actually of a calendar that only goes off of the stars. But primarily, there's 2 different schools of thought with the calendar, and that's that the one group of people will use the moon, because that was one of the things listed in Genesis. So they'll say that the moon should be what we use for years, and for months and for days and stuff like that. So people will start the day at evening. Like if you look at Jewish people primarily, they will start the day at evening. So like that's where they would keep the Sabbath from Friday evening until Saturday evening. So they start the day with the moon. The day goes by the moon. And then they also start the months by the moon. So they'll wait until a new moon, and there's also a debate on what is a new moon. I think Enoch is pretty clear on that. But so people will, they'll use the moon, and so they'll go off of the new moon, which Enoch says is like the crescent, or when it's 1/7 of its light. So I think that equates out to about 14%, I think it is. So when the moon is 14% lit up, it's pretty much a crescent moon, then you begin counting. And so there's a variance from 28 days up till 30 days. I think once maybe there's 31 days in the lunar cycle, but after that cycle, then you start a new month. And so that all of those months would get you to 354 days, and then the cycle repeats. So the year for the moon is 354 days, and you need a 13th month because of that every 3 years or so in order to keep the years of the moon in alignment with the sun, because the sun is what keeps the seasons. And so if you look at the equinoxes, the solstices as well, are like markers, where you can tell where you are throughout the seasons by those. And so if you look at those, that's really what keeps the seasons on track. And so in order for the moon months to keep up with the seasons, so you're not having your lunar year of spring, when the year should begin, back, like 3-4 months in in like December or November time frame, like winter, you've got to add in a 13th month. So it gets a little bit tricky with, why is this way? Why do you add in a 13th month? Like, can we find precedence for that? But then also it's all based off of observation. So if I'm looking for this new moon, I have to be out watching for it. And so there's problems that present themselves with doing that. If I'm out and I'm looking for the new moon and I'm looking up and it's cloudy and I don't see the new moon, what do? I know that there's computer programs that you can rely on, but that's like the whole point of the moon discussion, is that I should be able to look up and say, oh look, it's a new moon, new month. Simple. But if you can't see it, then what do? Do you make the call because you know that the computer says that there's a new moon there? Or do you wait until the next day? And then what happens if you get to the next day and it looks like a brand new moon still? Do you start your, and I've seen, multiple different groups that all go off of the moon. They'll be a day or two off in their months. And that presents a pretty big problem when you get to the month 7, because the very first day of the 7th month is the Feast of Shofars, or trumpets, which is it's the beginning of the fall feasts. So it would be the 5th feast. I had to do the math. So it'd be the 5th feast out of the year. Yeah, yep. And so that one is the first day of the 7th month. So if you get to that spot, what do? Because you're trying to observe the new moon, but you can't see it. Do you do the feast that day? It presents some issues. It also can present a lot of other issues with other, different things that it throws up, like the feast days. The feast days are on like 1/14 for Passover, for example. If you're not starting month 1 on the same day of the week, like on say day 3, if you start 1 year month 1 is on day 3, the next year it's on day 5 of the week out of 7 days, then that would mean that your feast days would rotate. So your feast days could and do, they do, after I've been observing it on the lunar years, the feast days do often overlap the weekly Shabbats. So that kind of tends to be a problem with, it's like if we're supposed to have a day of rest, on like this day, but then also like some of the feast days require work. So you're like, well, do we honor the weekly Sabbath or do we honor this once a year feast day? So it gets to be confusing, and there can be some, discrepancies as to when the month and when the year actually begin, based off of, who's determining if we add in the 13th month, or based off of I observed the moon but you didn't, kind of a thing. So we could be even on the same calendar off the moon, we could be on different days just based off of our own observations, wherever we are. So or whether it's cloudy or different things like that, because I don't know about you, I wouldn't start 7/1, the Feast of Shofars, if I didn't see it. If that's where I was going off of, I wouldn't start it if I didn't see it, just because I wouldn't, that sometimes the moon is dark for 2 to 3 days before it comes back. So you really never know unless you can observe it yourself or somebody else observes it for you, but then you're just trusting them. And I've seen people who have said, we saw it, and that they didn't, because you can easily just go on the, on their weather for where they are, and it was cloudy the whole time. So it gets to be very confusing and difficult, and it, like I said, with the feasts over they rotate weekdays, it gets kind of confusing. But the other measure would be the sun, which is what Jubilees and Enoch both just say, that the sun is for years. And so if the sun is for years, you've got 364 day is what the books say, as well as what you just observed. You've got 364 day cycle. And that cycle is divisible by 7. So you have 364 days, you divide that by 7, you end up with 52 weeks a year. Those 52 weeks can be broken up into 4 quarters of 13 weeks. So you've got a really simple outline. 364 is divisible by 7. That means that you're always starting the year on the same exact day every single year. So this calendar, going off the sun, always starts on the 4th day of the week, because he created the sun, the moon, and the stars on day 4. So we start the year on day 4, because that's when the cycle ends. That's when a new cycle begins. He rested on the 7th day. 3 days later from the new year, you always have the 7th day, which is the first Shabbat of the year. So it's super simple. The feasts never rotate weekdays. There's never any Sabbaths that are, what do we observe Passover? Like, because on Passover you've got to prepare a lamb and cook it, and there's some work involved with that. Do we do that stuff? Or do we do or do we do the weekly Sabbath? So there's never any of those things, because it's just simple. It's everything is just exactly where it should be. You've always got the year starting on day 4, which means that Passover is always on day 3 at evening. Unleavened bread is always on day 4. Sukkot is always on day 4. And then you've got other feasts that they're always all on the exact same day of the week. And then the other thing is that it's fixed, so you don't have to wait to observe something to start your next month. You know that there's 30 days in the first month, 30 days in the second month, and then there's 31 days in the third month, and that comes out to 91 days. Multiply that by 4, you get 364 days in a year. So it's really more like there's not as many questions. There's just more simple. If you look at when you start your month, which is your year, everything is calculated out, and then you can take that into next year and the year after and the year after, and you can go 20 years out. You can know what day Passover is 20 years from now, and it's very simple. So a lot of the videos I'll be doing coming up soon are going to be going more into depth. I'm going to go more into depth on the solar calendar first, show scriptures for why I think that's the way that the Creator designed it, just show how simple it is, show how really solid and sturdy it is, and then I'm going to go probably over some aspects of the lunar calendar and show how I think that doesn't fit through scriptures, and how people that will say that that's the measure for the year and the month are either ignoring some scriptures, or they're just taking things and not looking at everything as a big picture. So that's what I'm going to be doing with my upcoming videos, talking mainly about the calendar. We're about to start this. Yesterday was for the first day of the 12th month of the year, so now we've got 31 days, well, now being 30 days until the beginning of the year. So I'm going to be trying to get some videos based on the calendar out, so that everybody can hopefully start the year on the right calendar and observe his days, because they're his days on his calendar on the right time. Because when I was studying the calendar, I wanted to make sure that I got it right, because they're all of heaven is observing the feast as well. All of the angels, Yahuwah, Yahusha, they're all observing the feast days, and I wanted to be doing it with them, not on a different day. So hopefully I can encourage you guys and maybe clarify some things about the calendar that maybe you've never heard, maybe you've never seen, and just hopefully you can have a great feast season. Hallelujah.